This is the McKinsey Podcast, where we help you make sense out of our world's toughest business challenges.
Welcome to the show. I'm Lucia Rahili.
And I'm Roberta Fusaro.
I think that underlying mindset of continuous improvement, be curious, think about what could we do better, don't be defensive about how we've always done things. Those mindset pieces are critically important. And I think the COO often sets the tone on that.
That's McKinsey Senior Partner Dan Swan. The Chief Operating Officer's role is growing more important as companies try to use technologies like AI to improve productivity. COOs can influence AI adoption more than they think. We'll hear more from Dan in a minute.
First, just a couple of pieces of recommended reading from McKinsey.com. COP30, the UN's annual climate change conference, is wrapping up this week, and it's a great time to check out our research on the physical challenges of the energy transition. In fact, I'd say it's required reading for any business leader thinking about navigating increased power needs.
Yeah, and given companies' heavy experimentation with AI, we're going to need even more energy to power data centers and otherwise ease adoption. Listeners should check out McKinsey's global survey on the state of AI to get the latest.
Now let's hear from McKinsey Senior Partner Dan Swan.
Dan, thanks so much for being here today.
Roberto, thanks a lot for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the slowdown in productivity growth and what organizations and economies can do to help reverse the trend. Excellence in operations feels like it might be a good place to start. And even some of our own research at McKinsey shows that just 2% of companies account for 63% of productivity growth in major economies, which I guess underscores the point that operations really distinguish the market leaders from everyone else. Dan, what's the connection between the COO and a company's ability to increase their productivity and achieve their goals?
Great question. And I think one of the interesting parts about productivity is whether it's the COO, the CEO, the CFO, really setting that tone right from the top is super important. And you can walk into an organization and know right away, is the productivity mindset permeate from the top all the way to the front line? Or does it exist only in pockets in certain parts of the organization? You know, you've got people in manufacturing and supply chain and the service operations part that are obviously playing a massive role in how to drive costs and how to drive productivity year over year. But if they're doing that when they're at odds with the rest of the organization, it's a very tough slog and hard to get the results you need.
So looking at how hard or how easy maybe it is to achieve operational excellence, why do you think it's so difficult for business leaders to focus on the quick fixes and the long-term plans at the same time?
Yeah, it's the old, how do you run at two speeds at once? And I think one of the things we see is there are some organizations that are outstanding at the Band-Aids, right? They have a culture that is driven around reacting to the latest crisis, resolving it, and you actually reward people culturally that go above and beyond the call of duty to fix and control issues when they happen. And sometimes that can be actually at odds with what it takes to drive long-term productivity, which can be things like a consistent and standard process that everybody follows the same every time. Enabling those processes through technology so that you eliminate some of the non-value added work and you have your human labor focused on the things that are adding the most value to the organization. And sometimes that view of the hero mentality of Jane or Joe went out of their way and did something that was so remarkable that we celebrate it is very different than rewarding Jane or Joe for just doing the same thing every time for their step in the process or their part of the work. And so I do think getting people to both react and drive the short-term actions that you need to drive, hit the budget or fix when issues come up, At the same time, you're transforming the way you do the work is a challenge. And sometimes it's as simple as having different people work on those two different things. But oftentimes you got to be very clear about which thing you're trying to do with which effort. And sometimes that's a hard thing for organizations to get perfectly clear all the time.
So Dan, what levers do COOs have at their disposal to help boost productivity? Like, what exactly can they control?
Usually the COO has a broad range of levers at their disposal. What we find, people have a very clear mindset and target around what we're trying to achieve. The second thing we often see is a real focus on functional excellence. If you are a COO that buys a lot of stuff, how are you making sure that you're doing strategic sourcing, you're leveraging clean sheets, you're kind of bringing the best procurement capabilities to bear is really important. And the third thing I would call is just, the technology enablement. What we find these days is actually automation is one of the real enablers for productivity, both because there's at times a shortage of labor for certain roles, but also because oftentimes automation takes away the parts of the job that your employees like the least. So we actually see companies that have real automation are driving better employee retention. And when you've got people that are capable and have that experience, your productivity actually goes up meaningfully. So how do you really technology enable leveraging AI, generative AI, automation, the full caliber, the full suite of technology solutions to improve your processes? And then the last thing I would say is COOs that are really effective at reaching across the aisle, so to speak, and working with marketing leaders, working with sales leaders, are often the people that really differentiate on that last point or two of productivity. We see things like design to value, or how you think about kind of designing for cost and manufacturing as a real unlock that some companies have done very well and others have really struggled with. Same things in terms of how you set service level expectations, whether that's in a call center or in, transportation and delivery to your customers.
I want to get back to the point you made about tech enablement. There's a recent study from MIT. It says that about 95% of tech-driven pilots get stuck in purgatory. How can COOs who are facing this issue improve their odds of success?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we could have a whole podcast or series of podcasts on this question, because I think it is a defining question of our kind of generation of leaders. We really encourage clients to focus on where are the parts of your business that you need to transform to perform the way you want. The second thing that we would say is really thinking about doing stuff at scale from day one, hour one. When you look at a lot of the things that have gotten stuck in pilot purgatory, it's because somebody designs a pilot for one part of the organization and they go and they prove that it works. But what it takes to go from that one part of the organization to the rest of the organization is a totally different set of activities, skills, capabilities, technology investments to get that there. And so that notion of really thinking about stuff at scale from the very beginning and what it's going to take to get it across the entirety of the organization is critical.
Can you share some examples of companies that have had success with their pilots? Like maybe they're doing some cool thing with Gen AI or some other cutting edge technologies that they're using to improve operations.
I think when you look at it in the call center arena or customer care, as we call it, you'll see a ton of examples of people that are leveraging agents to help serve their customers. And what you find that's super interesting in that example is oftentimes people know they're talking to an agent versus a human being, and they are more satisfied talking to the agent than the human being. We might not want to look too closely at that one, but I think in reality, it means that people are very open and receptive. And I think there's pockets where you see that same thing on, something like R&D. We're seeing this in some of the product development space where you can go get feedback in a generative AI process in hours, what it would take before to do weeks and months of consumer sampling to get feedback on new products. But I do think the good news is over the last couple of years, we've reached an inflection point where there are enough examples out there to be really excited about.
Thinking more broadly about productivity, there's been a lot of talk about the impact and the influence of Gen AI on the workforce. How have you been thinking about it?
historically, we've thought about automation and technology being bad for our workers. I fundamentally believe the opposite. I mean, we still have, basically 500,000 manufacturing jobs open in the United States right now. There's open jobs in distribution. We're having a hard time filling some of these. And that's before you even think about all the new manufacturing facilities that are being built in the US, all the construction that's coming on. So I think we are realistically going to have, some labor shortages. We've estimated up to potentially 3 million by the time you get to 2030 in terms of skilled labor for manufacturing and construction. And so I look at that and say, hey, all of a sudden, it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. It's how we keep our economy running. It's how we fill the jobs. And oh, by the way, oftentimes automation takes away the parts of the job that our employees like the least. So I think that's incredibly powerful. I think the second thing that we see in this space is it provides an amazing opportunity for our frontline workers. I think there's some of our research suggests that 40 to 50% of a frontline labor's job and from a skill and how they spend their time could meaningfully shift over the next 3 to 5 years from technology. You could look at that and say glass half empty. That's very scary. If you look at that glass half full, you say those skills that they're developing are far more valuable and transferable outside of the current role that they're in. You're learning how to interact with computers and technology in a manufacturing environment. You're learning how to interact with robots. You're learning how to leverage AI and machine learning and other things like that are very transferable skills beyond just manual labor, if you will. And so I actually look at it as an incredible opportunity.
So I'm going to switch it up on you again, Dan. How can the COO encourage more collaboration across the C-suite or in the business units to build the kind of teamwork that leads to productivity improvements?
So I think for supply chain disruptions, that coordination and teamwork is critical. And then when you look at it from a productivity perspective, a COO often has meaningful control over a large portion of the cost base and can get to, pretty good productivity on their own. There's almost no COO that has control over the full cost base and the full decision rights in a way that you're going to get to really world-class productivity without getting the input from others. And I'll just give a couple examples of that, right? Oftentimes, one of the big drivers of productivity can be how effective you are being with your capital. Are you deploying new capacity? Are you investing in technology to drive productivity, et cetera? Well, a COO often has to work with the CFO and others to kind of figure out what the capital agenda looks like and how you prioritize the capital dollars. Another big driver of the cost base for any company is how you're thinking about which customer requirements you're going to meet, how you're thinking about product design, how you're thinking about service levels. And, those all drive collaboration with whether it's product development, R&D, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing. And so your ability to influence, the full set of costs just changes drastically when you have a more collaborative process of, yeah, I know that's your product design, but what if you change this material for that material? We think that the consumers might like it better and, it's 20% cheaper. That's way more interesting than go to your supplier and see if you can get it for 2% cheaper than what we've been buying it for the last year or two. So I think there's just a number of places where a COO, has to work with their peers on the executive team to really figure out the full cost and that trade-off to drive, the best-in-class productivity that any company can achieve.
Dan, I know that supply chains are kind of a personal passion of yours. If we're looking at external forces, things like tariffs and COVID and geopolitical instability, how can COOs help their organizations react and hopefully recover quickly when these big events strike?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Just understanding where your exposures are across your supply chain, and that can be people exposures, it can be product exposures, et cetera. I think the second thing that we really look at is where are the places where those risks are going to have a more fundamental business impact on you than not, right? And then the third thing is what are the levers that you can take? And we've seen a number of things, right? One is, there's some structural levers, like we have seen people move to more regional supply chain setups, right? It's not necessarily saying globalization is dead in any way, shape, or form. But if you're making and distributing the product closer to where you're selling it, you just by definition have a little bit more resilience in that. The second part of that is having multiple sources of supply, right? I think we've seen a lot of people that had single nodes of failure and really understanding those nodes in a way that is compelling. But we really look at resilience as a real skill and a real capability now.
And Dan, I'm assuming that resilience requires this kind of continuous look at operations. So you can observe, you can diagnose. I'm imagining this is not something that you should do once and put away.
Two reactions to that, Roberto. One reaction is, I don't think the world is getting simpler anytime soon. I think this is not a cycle. This is, I think, a structural shift in the complexity of how you operate a supply chain in this world we live in. And I think the second thing is the world is also changing faster and more dynamically. And we've honestly never seen that more acutely than what we dealt with and are still dealing with on some of the tariff timing, right?
I guess it's a lot like building a muscle, right? And working it out frequently and making sure that you stay strong in a particular area.
And a lot of our organizations have had capabilities. We used to talk, supply chain was this balance of cost, quality, and service, right? And people have been operating on that for a very long time and how they do that. And I think we would argue that, resilience and potentially sustainability are the fourth and fifth pillar of how you think about really a balanced, supply chain or a balanced operations organization these days. And so for sure, it's about building the muscle, and for sure, it's about getting better and better at understanding what those trade-offs are and how you make choices.
I know that operations excellence requires some sort of commitment, some sort of people commitment. People have to do things differently. Is there a role for the COO in helping to change people's mindsets and keeping people focused on growth and improvement?
I think absolutely there is a role for that. And if you look at some of the companies that have long been known as the best operations or productivity driving companies, take someone like Toyota, lean manufacturing, and the real foundation of all of that is continuous improvement, right? And how you make your process a little more efficient, a little more effective every single day that you come to work. Now it's, hey, how can technology enable me to change this? Or the external environment around me has changed meaningfully. So even if my process was perfect yesterday, my context may have shifted. So I need to be ready to be flexible and shift with that external environment. But I think that underlying mindset of continuous improvement, be curious, think about, what could we do better? Don't be defensive about how we've always done things. Those mindset pieces are critically important. And, I think the COO often sets the tone on that. It's just so powerful for unlocking not only productivity, but ideas that can drive growth, that can drive service, that can drive anything else, right? And so if I could impart one thing, it would be how to get that mindset around curiosity, continuous improvement really embedded in the organization.
Okay, and so now this might be a little bit of a navel-gazing question, but thinking about everything that we've been talking about and saying about COOs in the job today, how different do you think the role is now than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago? And then maybe if I could ask you to look into your crystal ball and predict where the role might be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the good news about it is a lot of the things that have made people successful COOs in the past will make them successful COOs today and will make them successful COOs in the future. This is things like being a terrific problem solver, having a bold ambition, being collaborative and being able to work across an organization, being an outstanding people leader. I would call out two things that I think have changed and will continue to change, and we're, somewhere in that journey. I think the first thing is what you often saw, maybe not just 10 years ago, but 15 or 20 years ago, was the COOs were the best operators. And if you worked in a manufacturing company, that might mean you were the best plant manager. If you worked in a services company, that maybe meant you had the best field operation or the best call center or whatever it is. And I think what we see more and more now is that it's really the people that are the best end-to-end thinkers in a physical supply chain. Can you think across procurement, product development, planning, distribution, logistics, manufacturing, and how you have people that really piece that together. And then importantly, also understand it from a sales and marketing perspective. And then the second really big shift is just the role that technology plays, right? I mean, I think the decision making between the CIO and the COO is getting fuzzier and fuzzier. And I think there's a lot of strength to that. But I think that really COOs embracing technology as just the way that the work is done is a mindset shift, but also just a capability. I mean, a lot of people that are COOs have been in business for 20 years, 30 years, and the technology landscape has changed massively. So how do you kind of keep with that and understand what those new capabilities are?
I guess it means a more exciting future for COOs, right? I mean, because you always want to grow and change, and certainly the next big technology, the next Gen AI, is going to present all kinds of learning and growth and development opportunities. So it totally makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm wildly biased, but I think there's never been a more challenging time to be in this field. And also at the same time, never a more exciting time to be in this field. And so you kind of look at that and say, what else can you ask for? I would certainly agree with you.
Dan, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the McKinsey Podcast. I'm Lucia Rahili.
And I'm Roberta Fusaro.
Find us on McKinsey.com. We'll have a transcript of this episode up shortly.
And download the McKinsey Insights app, where you can find this podcast and other helpful content updated daily.
If you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to leave a rating and a review.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.